Come back to the People's Cabinet. Okay, the murder of Charlie Kirk. I didn't want to make a video immediately about this because I wanted to be respectful of everything that was happening. Bottom line is, if you care about freedom of expression, if you care about expressing your opinions, regardless of whether they are left or right, without fear of violence or retribution, you should be gravely concerned about what happened to Charlie Kirk. First and foremost, taking a step back, this is a father of two young kids who will never see their father as they grow older, and a wife who is absolutely devastated. So the humanity of that alone is something that we need to respect. Secondly, we are in a time in which so many feel like their rights are being taken away. Due process rights. We have people who have had their visa revoked because they put an op-ed in a newspaper. The government has been threatening people. And I've heard a lot on the left that people are fighting back because they want that freedom of expression without retribution. And they're absolutely right. But we can't just be about the left being able to express themselves freely. We need to defend the right of people to express themselves without fear of retribution, especially violent retribution. We don't know the details of the shooter, and we don't know the motives. But we do know that Charlie Kirk was a highly controversial figure. I didn't agree, excuse me, with the vast majority of the things he said. In fact, I'm not sure there's a lot that we did agree with. And by the way, there's a lot of criticism of people who say at this time, I didn't agree with him on a lot. I think that doesn't have merit. I think it is fair to point out that you disagree with people. But there's a big difference between disagreeing with someone and wishing harm on them. And Charlie Kirk was murdered in cold blood in front of thousands of people while expressing his constitutional right of free speech. And so what I am concerned about is that chilling effect, that no matter who you are, and no matter what your opinions are, this society and this environment has created a fear that if you express yourself, there may be violence against you. And so to not condemn what we're seeing with Charlie Kirk or with Rep. Melissa Hortman or the countless other examples, regardless of politics, is to not condemn the very anti-forces of what we are as Americans. I want to be able to continue criticizing the Trump administration and Democrats and anyone else that I feel appropriate without fear of violence, without fear of wondering if someone's going to shoot me. I think you probably feel the same way too. And I think a lot of conservatives are worried about that. Our hearts and minds and winning influence should be about the case that we have to make to the American people about why certain policies are bad out of the administration, why there's hypocrisy in the administration, and pointed out why cutting funding to law enforcement is not commensurate with the rhetoric that Trump has said about being tough on crime. That's how we win. When we resort to violence on either side, that is the most un-American way of solving any kind of conflict where we pride ourselves in the peaceful transfer of power from the president all the way down. So let's keep that in mind. Let's hold that sacrosanct and steadfast, that we believe in freedom of expression and peaceful disagreement, that the views you have may be viewed by others as extreme, whether justified or not, and that the way we resolve our issues is through dialogue and debate, and not through violence. And most importantly, hug your family and stay safe. Welcome back to the People's Cabinet. Okay, so a new poll from the New York Times shows progress towards what we already thought, which is Zohran Mamdani is going to win the mayor's race in New York, and that even with the rumors of people dropping out, it will not stop Mamdani. So here's a top line. Mamdani is winning 46-24 over Cuomo, Curtis Sliwa at 15%, Eric Adams at 9%. It's actually pretty unbelievable that the sitting mayor is at 9% in this poll. If you unpack this, there's other things that I want to talk about Mamdani and how he's expanding his tent that I think are really important to point out. First and foremost, as I said, there's a lot of conversation about Eric Adams and whether he will drop out to take a Saudi ambassadorship or otherwise, because there were previous polls that showed that with him dropping out and Sliwa dropping out, that a head-to-head Cuomo would be leading. That is actually no longer the case. This poll shows, at least, that even with everyone else dropping out, Cuomo still has a 4-point behind Zohran Mamdani. I would also say, just given the nature and the intangibles of elections, even with Mamdani and Cuomo, if that were to occur, just by virtue of the way that Mamdani has approached this race and the way the public perception has solidified at this point, I would find it hard to believe even in a head-to-head Andrew Cuomo would beat Zohran Mamdani. This is more evidence, by the way, of some of the data that came out of this. An interesting point was around 60% of likely voters said Mr. Mamdani was inspirational, had good character, and cared about people like them. He is the only candidate viewed positively by a majority of voters despite months of attacks against him. And this is months of attacks. This is from a number of people, especially Andrew Cuomo. Here's a chart that shows a number of different issues: affordability 49-23, crime 30-29, dealing with the Trump administration 36-31. So all this notion, oh, he's not experienced enough for the Trump for that to deal with Trump, just doesn't hold water from the public perception perspective. Eric Adams is not going quietly into the night either, but it seems like he is directing his attacks towards Andrew Cuomo. As I mentioned, there were rumors of him dropping out and Andrew Cuomo, trying to orchestrate this. This is what Eric Adams said about Andrew Cuomo.
And to New Yorkers, I want to speak directly to you. There has been so much speculation, communications, announcements of what I'm doing, no matter what I have stated over and over again publicly. So I want to be clear with you. Andrew Cuomo is a snake and a liar.
So obviously no love lost there. If you look at the way Zohran Mamdani has now proceeded in terms of how he's expanding his tent, he was recently on with Abby Phillip, and there were two things that I thought were interesting. I mentioned the 60% of likely voters saying that he had good character. Here's a clip about his answer when Abby Phillip asked him if trillionaires should exist.
On another note, your democratic socialism has been just the center of everything that people talk about. But in this country, there's a big debate about the wealthy, the uber wealthy, the gap between the rich and the poor. Just this week, Tesla offered a pay package to Elon Musk that would potentially make him a trillionaire. Do you think trillionaires should exist?
I think the better question is whether working people should exist, because what we're seeing right now is amidst this incredible wealth, we have people who are keeping the city running that have to now live outside of the city, outside of the state. There are New Yorkers who are living in New Jersey and Pennsylvania and Connecticut because they just can't afford to live here. Amidst all of that, we have talk of trillionaires. I mean, it tells you where our political priorities are. And that's what is so frustrating, is that when we talk about the cuts to SNAP benefits here in New York City, the throwing of millions off of their health insurance, it's not just a incident that has taken place in Washington, D.C. It is a function of the largest wealth transfer we've ever seen in our history of our country's politics. Yeah.
So this one's really interesting because there are people all across New York and people who work in New York who have to commute from miles and tens of miles and hundreds of miles away every day because they can't afford to live in New York. It's a really interesting way to phrase it that sadly many Democrats don't even seem to have that thought enter their mind, let alone said. And it is true. And this is one of many examples of how Mamdani has spoken about affordability that I think really relates to people. He's talked about, when people say, well, what about rich people moving out of New York? His response is oftentimes, well, what about working people who have to move out all the time? As somebody who used to be chief of staff to a city, I appreciate how tax revenue fuels the city. But if you look at the data, the wealthy don't move out based on taxes. People want to be a part of New York, and oftentimes that's just a cover for people not wanting to pay more taxes. There was another question that Abby raised to him, and this was around this notion that he's not being endorsed by some Democrats and his reaction to that. Now, a lot of mainstream Democrats are not endorsing Zohran Mamdani right now. I would say that that is hurting those mainstream Democrats far more than it is hurting Mamdani. But here is his reaction when asked.
Tom Swazi, he's a representative from here in New York. He often talks about you and Trump in the same sentence. But the suggestion there is that you know how to diagnose the problem, which you have on housing, on food, on childcare. But the solution that you're offering is all too simple. It's overpromising and in ways that you cannot deliver. Is there a risk that you might overpromise New Yorkers on things that you can't execute on?
I would call him a colleague because we are part of the same party, the Democratic Party. And as Ed Koch said, a former Democratic mayor of New York City, that if you agree with me on 9 out of 12 issues, vote for me. 12 out of 12, see a psychiatrist. We have to have room for disagreement within a party. Otherwise, we just become a monotone that doesn't accept the innate tension of people coming together.
This is not a candidate that the mainstream Democrats had endorsed at the beginning. The perception was that Cuomo was going to win with his war chest. It would have been very easy for Zohran Mamdani to try to establish himself in some kind of anti-establishment frame in this. But instead, he spoke in a way that I think most people should speak, which is about how this should be a big tent party and that we should welcome different ideas to the table. So the fact that Mamdani took that tact, I think, was really important. There's another aspect of this that I think is really important to point out. Mr. Mamdani has an edge with all racial groups, leading Mr. Cuomo narrowly among Black voters. This is a change from what we saw in the primary, where Mamdani actually trailed older Black voters in terms of vote share relative to others, such as Governor Cuomo. This is a big deal. Everything is trending in the right direction for Zohran Mamdani. He's expanding his tent. His language is such that he continues to appeal to more and more voters. That's a little bit about this race. Believe me, there's 2 months left, and I'm sure that there is much more to come here. Let's stay close on it, and it should be pretty interesting down the stretch. Welcome back to the People's Cabinet. Okay, bombshell was released by the Oversight Committee regarding Jeffrey Epstein. And this basically corroborated a story in the Wall Street Journal that Donald Trump claimed was a lie, threatened to sue the Wall Street Journal for, that basically had written that the president had submitted a poem with a picture with a female form I won't read this candidly odd poem, but it includes things like enigmas never age, a palace a wonderful thing, may every day be another wonderful secret. If you look at the picture, it is a female form with breasts outlined, as well as Donald Trump's signature in a region of the body. Again, Donald Trump has just completely lost credibility on this issue. He continues to just deny. He claims that this is false. Candidly, it's very clear that this has spooked him and MAGA. You see Caroline Leavitt tweeting about it, denying it. You see JD Vance tweeting about it, denying it. But if you actually look at Donald Trump's signature relative to other things that he had signed around that time, it's very clear that it's his signature. Here is the thing about Donald Trump and this whole scandal. If he had nothing to hide, he would not behave this way. That is just clear. And if behaving this way were worse than the truth, he would not be behaving this way. It is the same It is the same behavior that Donald Trump exhibited around his tax returns, for example. It is very clear those are still not been released, and it's very clear that he's doing that because he knows that the criticism he would take from hiding his tax returns are not as bad as the criticism he would receive if people saw it. This is obviously significantly worse in terms of what happened to underage girls that candidly Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, and endless folks in MAGA had been trying to say was going to that justice was going to be sought and received as a result of a Donald Trump presidency. You saw what happened in the in the White House with the influencers with the binders that were nothing in it, and the constant conversation and drumbeat from MAGA. What people I think don't give Trump enough acknowledgement for is that he's very effective behind the scenes in making phone calls and calling people. And what he has done, I believe, and I don't have evidence for this, but just knowing how he behaves, is that he's just had a phone and campaign behind the scenes to silence MAGA on the Epstein issue. And candidly, given how loud MAGA had been in the name of underage girls, it is disgusting to see how they have backed off this because Donald Trump wants to run for cover. Politico in Playbook this morning writes that MAGA has been silent in a way that they haven't in the past. That is not for any other reason, I am sure, than Donald Trump has worked to silence people behind the scenes, threaten people, all of that stuff. But the fact that the people who claim to have morals on this issue would back off because of those threats, candidly, is disgusting and just exposes hypocrisy. The last thing that I think is really important to point out, there's people who have talked a lot about what did Joe Biden do? What about Biden? Why do people all of a sudden already care? Joe Biden, when Joe Biden was president on January 3rd of 2024, hundreds of Epstein documents were released by the Southern District of New York. Those documents, many of them were in the binders that I referred to earlier. That was part of the proceedings. It proceeded the right way, and those were released. If you contrast that with Donald Trump, who had endlessly, candidly manipulated the desire of so many Americans to get the truth on Epstein, whether he killed himself or not, whether powerful people were trying to cover it up, and to see how he had used that to propel himself in the eyes of the American public, and then to see him just blatantly lie. I mean, this is clearly him. It's clearly his writing. As someone who works for many principals, you do not submit things with signatures on them without making sure the principal is aware of it, especially something this crude. So this notion that he's just going to get away with lying, I think the most of the American public doesn't buy it. It is disgusting that MAGA has just kind of rolled over on this, and what Trump is saying that it's a hoax is just, again, it demeans the victims in this. It demeans, insults the intelligence of the American public. Unfortunately for Trump, I think this is candidly just the beginning. There's a lot of people who will not let this go, and I think we will see many more revelations to come. The Wall Street Journal has reported that Attorney General Pam Bondi has told the president that he is mentioned in the Epstein, in many Epstein documents or in Epstein documents. I don't know exactly how many. I think it's really important to point out that there is no evidence that Donald Trump was a part of the underage girl ring. That is not the evidence right now. But he is not behaving, again, like someone who is completely innocent here. MAGA, that used to be the arbiters of justice on this, seem to have abdicated that. And so we need to continue to push on this. There'll be more to come on this. I think the most important thing is to not forget the victims here who are suffering as this all happens, as candidly they have to go through a roller coaster of emotion and events that proceed, and a president who seems to be actively trying to cover up whatever truth that there is. And candidly, is not only disgusting, but more evidence of the character of our president. Welcome back to the People's Cabinet. Okay, it was announced that NATO had shot down Russian drones over Poland. Why is this something that we should care about or be concerned about? Let me give the floor to Chris Coons, who's on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, to explain both what is NATO and why we should care about the alliance.
Ukraine is a free country that has a free media, free elections, and was steadily moving towards joining the European Union and NATO. Ukraine was previously a part of the Soviet Union. Russia is not a free country. They do not have free and fair elections. They don't have a free media. And they have one of the largest and most sophisticated militaries on earth. In order to punish Ukraine for imagining they might become part of Europe and they might expand their range of options as a free country, Vladimir Putin first started a war with Ukraine in 2014 when he invaded and occupied Crimea and supported so-called separatists in the eastern part of Ukraine. But in 2022, in February, he launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. For us to abandon Ukraine would send the message that we are a profoundly unreliable partner and would raise the question whether we're willing to help stop Putin. My friend, the former Senator, late John McCain, said repeatedly, Putin will only stop when we stop him. And in his view, part of what led to this full-scale invasion was that in 2008, he took a bite out of Moldova and he took a bite out of Georgia. In 2014, he took a bite out of Crimea, eastern Ukraine. And his concern was that Putin would just keep going after that. There is, I think, real reason to fear that if the United States abandons Ukraine, Putin will roll over the rest of it and then keep going into the 3 Baltic states, into Poland, into Eastern Europe, whether overtly or covertly, and will end up reconstituting pieces of the Soviet Empire, which has been clearly his goal for years. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, which just celebrated 75 years, is the most successful military alliance or treaty organization in history. And its core is Article 5, which says an attack on one is an attack on all. And it's only ever been invoked once, and that was when the United States was attacked on 9/11. And NATO troops served and fought alongside American troops in Afghanistan for 20 years and took casualties and sacrificed at about the same level as the United States on a per capita basis. They showed up early, they fought bravely, they stood alongside us. They could easily have thrown up their hands and said, this is not our fight. Mainland U.S. was not invaded, it was a simple terrorist attack, but they didn't. They came when called and helped defend the United States and our interests.
Okay, so obviously, as the senator had outlined, the concern is that Putin, if he were to be allowed to take over Ukraine, he would move on to Poland and then continue on through Europe. Nobody wants that, and that's something that NATO is designed to prevent. This is unclear what Putin meant by doing this, but it is obviously being seen as a potential provocation and an expansion of this conflict. That is what we have to be worried about. That is the entire point of why we have been so concerned about Ukraine in the first place from the perspective of America's national security. If Putin is allowed to invade Ukraine, take over Ukraine, it is clear, especially from behavior like this, that his intention is not to stop there, but to continue to places like Poland, which neighbors Ukraine, and then on to further aspects of Europe. That makes us all less safe. The biggest concern here is that we have a president who, instead of backing Zelensky, has mocked Zelensky. Instead of expressing concern about Putin, has expressed a very bizarre reverence to Vladimir Putin, all the way down to rolling out a red carpet for him, literally in Alaska, without getting anything tangible for it. So we have a president who seems to have an admiration for the person who is literally aggressing against our allies at this point. We should all be concerned about it, and we all need to stay on this. This is unfortunately just the beginning, and we do not have a leader who I believe is the strongest to stand up to the person who is aggressing, is the aggressor in this situation, and as a result threatens America as well. Welcome back to the People's Cabinet. Okay, so PPI, CPI, and PCE. What do these acronyms mean, and why should you care? So PPI, or the Producer Price Index, is the price that wholesalers are selling their goods to businesses. that the businesses then turn around and sell to you. So a wholesaler sells a loaf of bread to a grocery store, they buy it for a certain price, and then they sell it to you. It was announced this morning that it was 2.6% year over year, which was under expectations of 3.3%, which shows that inflation may be moderating. Tomorrow, the Consumer Price Index, or CPI, is coming out. That is a measure of your cost of living, things like how much you're paying for housing, things like your groceries, etc. Then there is the Personal Consumption Expenditures Price Index, or PCE. That is the broadest measure of cost of living of the three that the Fed looks at. That includes things like your employer paying your health insurance, things that you may not pay, but your employer is paying to measure cost of living. The Fed has said that their target for PCE is 2%. The last measure of PCE, 2% year over year. The last measure of PCE was around 2.6%, therefore not meeting their target. The Fed meets 8 times a year. Their next meeting is next week before the PCE numbers will come out for the previous month. It is widely understood that they will probably decide to lower interest rates. This is what Donald Trump wants. It will make the cost of borrowing money cheaper because the interest rate is lower, which will put more money into the economy, which tends to be good for the growth of the economy, at least in the short term. What we need to look at in the longer term is after that PCE number comes out, is it still showing a trend towards 2% that shows that we can continue to lower interest rates without causing more inflation? Donald Trump cares most about just lowering interest rates. We as a society and an independent Fed should care the most about making sure that we don't have runaway inflation in pursuit of that. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the People's Cabinet. If you did, please like, subscribe, ring that bell, and tell us who else you would like to see sworn in. And let us know in the comments what other topics you'd like us to cover. Let's go.